not only is the person the center of his or her own existence, they want to be the center of everyone's existence. Now, this was manifested in the Rodney King situation. Now, here is a police officer who is charged with enforcing the law. He sees a motorist who is or appears to be in violation of the law. He signals the motorist to come to a stop. The motorist disobeys, thereby exacerbating the situation, and now the officer gives chase. When the ego is underdeveloped, we confuse the authority that has been vested in us with our personal self. And so rather than seeing that the law has been violated, we feel that we have been violated. And all praise is due to Allah. And so when we chase the suspect, when we catch the suspect, we forget that in this system of jurisprudence, this person remains a suspect. Your job as a police officer is to take this person into custody, bring him into a place where he will be registered, noted, possibly remain in custody. Then he is to be brought before a judge who is trained in the law. He is to be represented by legal counsel. And at that time, he is to be given a hearing and afforded the opportunity to explain his or her conduct. But when the ego is undeveloped, or when we have a superiority complex which makes us think we are God, then we act as God would respond when we disobey his commandments. God has the right to take life because God conferred life. But since none of us created life and none of us are self-created, then none of us, no, not one, has the right to take a life because we feel that we personally have been violated. And so this is why 60% of black people said we feel we're unfairly treated, and only 30% of whites, because white people perceive the police officer as Mr. Officer Smith. Officer Smith is the man that helps you cross the street. Officer Smith is the man that gets your cat out of the tree. Officer Smith is the man that comes and gets that mean old burglar away from your house. Officer Smith is the one that protects you. But to black people, Officer Smith is the one that prowls around through your community. Officer Smith is the one who calls little 13-year-old black girls over to the cruiser and invites them to sit in the car, and they don't return until the next morning. Officer Smith is the one who arrests your 14-year-old son and then comes and says he hung himself with a tie last night. These are irreconcilable perceptions as long as both people are out of balance. Because all of us have to learn that there is only one who is worthy of our submission, and that is the Creator. Whether we know him as God, whether we know him as Jehovah or Christ or Allah, the one who created life is the only one who is entitled to say, "Fear me and me alone." Misinterpretation of fact can produce very negative results, and as I indicated earlier, racism is produced by misinterpretation. Now, returning briefly to the O.J. Simpson trial, and then I will have my seat, and I think that we will open the floor to question and answer. Now, I am an attorney, and I served as a prosecutor in the city of New York. I have been responsible for sending people to prison for breaking the law. And I preface my comments on the O.J. Simpson case with that. But it was a manifestation of pre-existing perceptions or racism that caused white America to have such a vehement response to the acquittal. Now, O.J. Simpson, and we cannot discuss whether or not he did it. I was not there.
All right.
So I cannot and would not attempt to answer that question. What concerns me and what caused distress to me during that case and in the aftermath of it was the fact that a jury sat for 9 months and listened to evidence. Now, the law says that where there is a reasonable doubt as to any material fact, then you are not only given a right, but you have a duty to find in favor of the defendant when that happened, because it was not the outcome that Caucasian people wanted. They were ready to throw away the law and say that the law doesn't make any difference. Now we are calling the jury names, perceptions. As a black woman, I don't perceive the jury as not giving due deliberation. When you sit for 9 months and hear evidence, it is only natural, unless something is wrong with you, that you are going to begin to form an opinion.
That's right.
Secondly, reasonable doubt was raised very early in the trial. Everyone wanted to focus on the so-called race card. However, everyone wanted to overlook the presentation that was made by Dr. Henry Lee, the forensic expert who raised reasonable doubt when he challenged the integrity of the evidence. Why is there this presumption that black people don't understand scientific presentation? Where did that come from? We can also look at that in the reverse and say how silly and ignorant it is to say that a person who committed such a violent murder, where 2 people were brutally murdered, cut, stabbed, the jugular vein was pierced, blood sprayed everywhere, and you're discussing minute drops of blood as evidence.
All right.
Why is it that Johnny Cochran is called names by Marcia Clark in her autobiography? Johnny Cochran is accused by other members of the legal profession, Caucasian members, of making money off of the case, when Marcia Clark is now a multi-millionaire from this case. Chris Darden is a multi-millionaire. These were government workers who just happened to be in the, quote, right place at the right time. How many attorneys were made into talk show hosts off of this case? And yet the one black man who stood out as the centerpiece of the case is condemned and referred to by such names as Calhoun and called a slickster and a shyster, when he did nothing more than give a brilliant representation of his client. I am currently engaged in an appeal on a libel suit that was filed by Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam against the New York Post. In 1994, that paper issued a headline that said, "Malcolm X widow pins murder on Farrakhan," in big, bold letters. Most of you are familiar with the New York Post. You know that it's a tabloid. A tabloid that is now hiding under the protective embrace of the First Amendment, which was never designed to protect this type of libel. But this was a divisive measure using the late Dr. Betty Shabazz, a member of our community, the widow of one of our slain leaders, How did the U.S. government feel about Malcolm X?
All right. Make it plain.
And yet, there is a division in the black community because Minister Louis Farrakhan, there are rumors that he was responsible for the assassination. And though most of us know that that is absurd, because it is constantly fed in the white press, credibility is given to it. So after listening to this for 10 years, we said we cannot allow this any longer, and we brought the lawsuit. And though we have proven that the statement was made, we cannot get a trial of this case. Why? Because a judge has said, yes, you have shown that the statement was made. Yes, it was not true. It is not true that he is the murderer of Malcolm X, and it's not true that the widow of Malcolm X said that he murdered her husband. However, because he is a public figure, he must prove actual malice. He must prove that the defendant intended to print this story, that they knew when they printed it that it was unlikely to be true. We have proof of that, volumes of proof that the writer knew that what he was writing was presented in a way that was false. However, the judge decided you can't prove that to a jury. Well, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that that is a question for the finder of fact. That's the question for a jury to decide. That is not a question of law, whether or not the New York Post did this intentionally, whether or not Jack Newfield, who wrote the story and claimed to have had access to FBI files, did in fact have that access. He claimed to have interviewed a person by the name of Charles 37X Kenyatta, who in turn claimed that a former member of the Nation of Islam said Minister Farrakhan was personally involved. Why can't we interview this person and question that person? And so this is a matter of the judge's perception, you see, being irreconcilable with our perception of the facts. And this is why we are entitled to have a jury of our peers to hear this case. The JonBenet Ramsey murder
Go ahead.
is on the other side of the spectrum.
Cover.
And I want to use that as I take my seat as an illustration of superiority complexes. Now, I do not know, again, I was not there, but I know that this was a horrific crime. And I know that all of us are sitting here tonight and a 6-year-old is lying in her grave who died a torturous death. Now, we know one thing. We know she died in her own house. We know that there was snow on the ground, and there were no footprints in the snow indicating that anyone came in or out of the house. We know that this was Boulder, Colorado, where everyone knows everyone else.
That's right. That's right.
And yet, I am not talking about a conviction. I am asking, where is the arrest? There is not sufficient evidence to arrest, they claim. And yet, when OJ got off the plane, returned from New Jersey on his own, he didn't have to come back. He was not under any obligation to return to Los Angeles, but he flew in on his own and he was immediately handcuffed. Now I ask you, does this represent an abyss between the treatment of one and the treatment of the other? The Ramseys have left Boulder. They just moved to Atlanta, where I live.
right.
When my husband and I took out our mortgage, when we moved from Chicago, Illinois to Atlanta, Georgia, my husband's standing here, he will bear me witness, we were asked by the mortgage company to write a statement explaining why we were moving from Chicago to Atlanta, Georgia.
Think over there.
Now the press is here. I want you to ask whether or not the Ramseys
All right.
had to put on their application, because I have a good idea why they're moving from Boulder, Colorado to Atlanta, Georgia. But I say to all of us that if we would just submit to the Creator and begin to look at everyone else through His view,
Yes, ma'am.
rise above emotion into the thinking of God. Don't look at people through our eyes. Look at people through God's eyes, because no matter what we think of that person, He had a reason for allowing that person to come through the torturous journey from the sperm into life.
All right.
And so may Allah bless all of us with the light of understanding as I greet you in peace. Assalamu alaikum.
I think we're all fully stimulated now. It's one of the interesting things about our predicament, both Native Americans, Indians, and African Americans, it is that if we're not able to laugh sometimes, we will die of the weight of our oppression. And I thank you for making us laugh tonight. There is a microphone here in the front. I invite you to come and form a line, and so that we may begin to take questions. And we'll begin with the first person in the line.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for being.
Please do me one favor. Say your name.
Yes, this is Carol Harvey. I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm Navajo and Spanish. And I'm very pleased to be here, and I always love seeing a fellow sister. And I can assure you that I can validate your experience of racism 100%. And if anybody thinks that Cherokees are not Indians, all they have to do is remember the Trail of Tears. Just as Cherokees were removed from the southeast, Navajos were removed from their homeland to Fort Sumner. We incurred a similar trail of tears. And when I was doing my family research, I was hoping to go back to the list of 7,000 Navajos that were interred at Fort Sumner at Bosque Redondo, New Mexico, and perhaps find one of my relatives' names. When I went back to find the list, it was a settling of accounts by a military officer to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And all it had were columns. And in those columns were numbers of gains of Indians, losses of Indians, runaways of Indians. But there was not a single name of a person. Following that list of 7,000 Indians, which contained my relatives, there was a lengthy description of each of the officers that had served at Fort Sumner. So we certainly could identify them and their history and their service, but we were simply a settling of accounts. I wanted to tell you that if anybody should ever tell you, well, Cherokees, they've got a break, they're not treated as Indian. I left a position because of the following joke that was said at a dinner party. There was a young Cherokee boy who had done really well in school, and his tribe sent him to college. He received an engineering degree, and when he went back to his reservation, he was the first one to wire ahead on that reservation. So if anyone would ever think that Cherokees are not Indians, I assure you, they are as Indian as all the rest of us. Thank you.
Assistant, yeah, those are on, those should be on. Talk with-
Thank you for your comments.
Wait,
Uh,
turned it up to your mouth.
Okay.
Can we get a little more volume here, please?
Thank you for your comments. The reason why I think that people make that comment is because of the tribe I am currently enrolled with, the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. They have, you only have to prove descendancy. I mean, you could bleed and not be Indian, you know. I mean, their blood quantum is so low that if you can prove you have an ancestor on the rolls, you can get a card from the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And the majority, they have an enrollment of about 100 and something thousand, and the majority, I think there's only like 2,000 or 3,000 full-bloods enrolled with that tribe. So that's the reason for my comment.
Thank you. The other thing that is of concern to me that I think your comment reflected back to me is that in my company there are allegedly 70 Native Americans employed, and not one of those other 69 have ever come up to me and introduced themselves to me. And among our people, that is the first thing that is done. We are so happy to see each other. We always go up and we immediately say, I'm Carol Harvey, I'm from Santa Fe, my dad is Robert Harvey, he's Navajo from Lukachukai on the northeastern part of the Neo-Navajo reservation, and that is how we greet each other. It is by our family, and it is a matter of great pride and great joy. And yet not one of those people who filled out on their application for employment that they were Native American have ever come up to me and said hello. And so I am concerned that many people do check college applications, employment applications, any other applications where they may benefit by Native American identity as being Native American.
Thank you very much.
This is a legal question, Sister Muhammad.
Can you say your name?
My name is Delvin Williams. Pan Am Flight 103 was bombed in Lockerbie, Scotland. 2 Libyan nationals were tried or being tried for crimes they have not substantially proven were their responsibility. The United States, the United Kingdom, and France have levied sanctions number 741, 883, and 884 against the Libyan national government. In your opinion, without proof of Libya's involvement in the bombing, are these nations out of line?
Absolutely, absolutely. On its face, the imbalance lies in the fact that in this instance, the United States of America legally would be in the position of a party, a plaintiff in it. For example, in a lawsuit, could not also serve as the judge. And what the Libyan government has requested since the bombing of Flight 103, Pan Am 103, is that an international tribunal or that an international court hear the case. Their concern has never been an unwillingness for there to be a trial, but the government of Libya has always taken the position that if the United States is allowed to try these persons, that they could not possibly receive a fair hearing. I think that we all know that they are correct in that assessment. And so I think that rather than condemn this nation and have sanctions against them, and oftentimes these economic sanctions, such as exist against Iraq, Iran, also Nigeria, diplomats who try to come here from Nigeria are being denied visas. And oftentimes it is the people and the women and children of these nations who suffer the most because of a lack of proper medicine, a lack of food. But these economic sanctions have a devastating effect on the entire human family, all because of a political disagreement.
Thank you, Richie.
Say
My name is Charles Crosby, and I would like to say that I'm grateful that both speakers brought up the problem within your own race, because I have lived in the South forever, and my biggest problem have come from my own people, you know, because I can deal with white ignorance, but when your own people is prejudiced against your dark skin,
Yes.
or, you know, because of your economical status, I think that when you address an audience of this size, that the main focus that we have to be concerned about is interracial hate and prejudice.
Absolutely.
Let me just take the prerogative of the chair to comment on that. And I think that we will be very ill-served if we don't recognize that the current national debate about census identification, about multiracialism, finds expression both in the question of the that was just raised, or the comment just made by Mr. Crosby, as well as both presentations by both of our speakers. The issue of identification, an identification card, which validates one's membership in a racial group, is easily translated, as it was translated with regard to the Indians, into economic benefits. And the reason that Indians are required to have this card is because the federal government owes them money. Right. And to the extent that African Americans become captives of this process, the whole argument about reparations is undermined. I just want to remind us of that.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Menzie.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Jeff Menzie. Okay. First of all, I want to start. I couldn't think of a more appropriate time than to have a moment of silence for Sister Betty Shabazz. Okay, I'm asking for a moment of silence for Betty Shabazz.
For Dr. Betty
Yes,
Shabazz, I think that's quite appropriate. Can we do that?
Okay. The other day I met a lady
Thank you for reminding us of the loss of a very dear friend and a great woman.
Yep. Okay, I have comments. Okay, the other day I met a lady by the name of Miss Cheer, the detergent lady. That's what she said, as kids know her as. Okay, she's 89 years old. Okay, she was ready to go to the trenches for our race. Okay, for the Betty Shabazzes, for the Miss Cheers, for the two ladies on the stage, they've confirmed my belief that behind every strong black man is a strong black woman. But it also brings up a thought into my mind that behind every strong black woman, there needs to be 5 strong black men. And also, I had the pleasure of meeting the man that's standing behind me, Mr. Jesse Nighthawk. We've been kicking it over the past few days. We have conversations, and we thought of, you know, we both discussed problems with our individual races, and all the differences between the two. And they have Mr. Peltier, Leonard Peltier. We have Geronimo Pratt. Okay, they were here on this land first. The white man came over and knocked them off. We were brought over. Okay. Out of all the differences that we could come up with, there was one commonality in all of them: white supremacy. Okay. The tool of theirs is divide and conquer. I feel that we need to unite and fight.
Jesse Nighthawk.
It's me again.
Thank God.
Thank God. They said, we thought you were leaving yesterday. I said, no, you stuck with me for one more day. But promise, I'm out of here tomorrow. On the subject of repatriation, I live in Pennsylvania now, and I have come into a situation where there is a construction site that they think that they need to dig up the bones and put a sewage lift station there. These bones have been there probably since the last of the Susquehannocks. And they've been there since probably the 1400s along the Susquehanna River in Washington, what is present-day Washington Borough. My question, I guess, is The Repatriation Act, does that supersede any state, local ordinances?
No, it doesn't.
Talking to Mike.
Only if it is on federal properties. And then there's still some stipulations when you get into NAGPRA.
Can I ask you, could you just take a minute to explain what he's asked about? I'm not sure about it here now.
Okay, I don't know how many of you know that Tennessee was inhabited by the Indian, Native American, to be politically correct, in Tennessee. And as you know, in those times, they didn't stop to have a funeral and bury these people. If someone died, then they just buried them where they died. And we've been having a lot of construction all over the U.S., actually. And in Tennessee, with the new roads they're building, all the new apartments, any type of construction that's happening, sometimes they find Indian graves. And the first thing they want to do is most of the time they just want to bulldoze them, but that's against the law. And so they have to contact us, the Tennessee Commission of Indian Affairs, that they are going to hire an archaeological firm to go in and do a site testing. And once that's completed, then the results are sent to the state archaeologist, and they decide, they have to go through court, get a court order to terminate a cemetery. And most of the time, because the rules which this law falls under, they're very weak. And so they go in and they get a court order, and 99.9% of the time, the judge lets them have that termination. And at that point, they disinter the remains, and they're sent to the state archaeologist for study for 6 months, and after 6 months, they're released to the Tennessee Commission of Indian Affairs. And then we have a reburial ceremony at that point, and which is not open to the public. It's a private event with only a few Indian people there, and we have a medicine person or someone that we feel is that can do the ceremonies. And then that's basically all that's involved.
Where is the determination made about whether or not the remains should be remanded to another part of the country because the person is of one tribe or another?
If they have NAGPRA, if they're culturally identifiable, then the tribes that the remains and artifacts are identified with, the tribe is contacted, and the tribe decides if they want the remains and the artifacts. And the majority of the time, they usually take them and rebury them wherever their tribal site is.
And does that apply to every state or just certain?
No, every state laws are different. There are other states that do have stronger cemetery laws than Tennessee. Tennessee's probably 100 years behind everybody else.
All right, thank you. Another question?
My last and final question or comment is on your take on the Presidential Commission on the Committee on Racism. Earlier this week, I spoke with a representative from the National Congress of American Indians, and he more or less told me that they had submitted, I guess, several names to be for representation on this particular committee, and whoever saw fit passed on all these names. And I would like, hopefully, that from this organization and from this meeting to go on record as, demanding that there be a Native American or Native Americans on this commission, and they can even be Cherokee, you know.
They can do what?
I said, they can even be Cherokee, you know, whatever.
He said they could even be Cherokee. I knew that was a good line. All right, well, but I think that that's an important recommendation, and Dr. Wimbush, who is back there in the back, I'm sure has heard it, because one of the things that must be addressed with regard to this commission, and Dr. Ponder talked about it a little today, I will talk about it in the morning, is that one commission made up of 7 people meeting periodically is not sufficient for addressing the magnitude of this problem of racism. And there must be other permutations and combinations of the concept of the advisory committee. And certainly it's an appropriate time for there to be recommendations for people to be included in that process.
I want to thank everyone. Ladies, thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm original from Anderson, South Carolina. I was raised in South Carolina on a big farm. And I was raised up with white children. I didn't know anything too much about blacks until I was 10 years old. But I came to Nashville to go to school. But I didn't make it, but problems when I came up. But anyway, I came to the Nation of Islam. I started in Islam in '59. And we, my husband, started Islam here in Nashville. So I have built the temple so far, and so I am proud to see you here today. And one thing I'm going to make this statement. I am praying that we won't become like we once before. The devil took our names. I'm afraid that they're going to take that mule and land again if we don't be careful. These old English names we got, we need to change our names because it's getting terrible. Because they are ready to take your everything you got. Because this S-O-N, you know what I'm saying? Mr. Jefferson, or Mr. Dixon, these old names are ugly. These are ugly names. Now, O.J. Simpson got an ugly name. That's his problem. And so now, they are ready to take everything we got. If we can't get right with God, now it's time for us to get right with God. If we don't, or we're going to be pulled down again and be in slavery once more time. And it's going to be worse this time. Assalamu alaikum.
How do you do? My name is Travis Atkins. I'm a history major here at Fisk University. And a lot of times in our history classes, we talk about the relationships between the Native Americans and, our people, black people. And I thought that it was very, spiritually, just made me feel good to see Native American people for the first time, because we learned that a lot of times when we were running from the master, we didn't know anything about the backwoods and the areas throughout this land that they call America now. And so I just wanted to say on behalf of our ancestors, I would want to thank them for taking us in when we were running away. And my question is for both of the panelists. I want to know, do you really think, since we've been talking about white supremacy all week, is it possible for people of color all throughout the world to actually live in actual peace as long as the white man remains on the earth?
Who would you like to answer that question? Any takers? Be my guest.
As I attempted to address in my remarks, what we are dealing with is a state of mind. This is what has to be destroyed, is a state of mind. And superiority as well as inferiority are both states of mind that are not aligned or in harmony with the will of God. You and I are just as much in error when we submit ourselves to another as the person who is seeking to force us to submit. Do you understand? It is wrong in the sight of God to worship any other than Him. And so it is always going to result in wars and conflict as long as we are out of balance. Now, as long as we use the term race, and I take these words from Minister Farrakhan, a race is something that has a beginning and an ending. It is finite. And as long as the Caucasian people insist on categorizing everyone, including themselves, into races, then they're actually bringing about their own demise. Because if you had a definite beginning, you have a definite ending. If you want to be on this earth eternally, the only way to do that is to align yourself mentally and spiritually with the will of the Creator, because flesh is nothing more than the home for the spirit. And the flesh will ultimately leave. It will not be able to sustain the spirit except for a finite period of time. And even though melanin-dominated people have the ability to achieve more longevity, we too will ultimately leave the planet Earth. And so the goal is not so much to dominate the Earth, and I think that's the problem now, is who is going to have charge over what territory. There is a false conception out now that has been put out by the Caucasian people that the Earth is overpopulated. The Earth is not overpopulated. The Earth has sufficient space. I think the study was, upward of 40 billion people. But when you have one person who owns 1 million acres of land and just uses them for recreation, then you have a population problem. And so again, what we are dealing with is not the absence of sufficient resources, but the improper distribution of wealth. And as long as that exists, there will not be peace, there will always be war.
No, I think she said it all.
I just want to comment. I think that it was very thoughtful that Travis Adkins reminded us of the harbors of safety, which African Americans found with Native Americans, to be politically correct, or with Indians. I was saying earlier to Rebecca that, in fact, as is true of me, as is true of many people in this audience and in the Black community, every one of my grandparents was a Cherokee. And we know that since my great-grandparents were born into slavery, that was one of the mechanisms for all of our survival. And so I think that was a very thoughtful and feeling thing for you to do. Thank you. Sir.
My name is Carla Muhammad, and I have 3 questions. The first 2 questions are for Sister Ava Muhammad, and the second question is for Sister Rebecca. And keeping the focus of white supremacy, could you comment on the prevailing exploitation of Black women in the area of entertainment? And also, Sister Ava, could you explain the phrase, "A nation can rise no higher than its woman"? And then for Sister Rebecca, could you comment on the celebration of the holiday Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving. All right.
On the question of the exploitation of Black women in entertainment, I will tie that into the second question, a nation can rise no higher than its woman. I recently came across a term used in psychology called learned helplessness. And the psychologist who used it said that this is not an inherited trait, this is an acquired trait where one thinks that one has no control over his or her own circumstances, but is totally dependent upon some external force. One of the residual effects of disobedience to God's will has been sexism. And in the name of religion and in the name of politics, There have been doctrines that have upheld this idea that the only function of the female is the sexual satisfaction of males and to be the carrier of physical life. But we know, particularly the black woman, through our experience and our sojourn here in America and having carried the black nation through 430 years of suffering, we know that not only is the female the carrier of physical life, but she is the carrier of the vision. That there is no dream that can be fulfilled unless there is a woman to help man attain that dream. And you cannot name any man, black or white, of stature, who does not name a female in his life that had some impact, because it is the woman who nurtures and gives the man a place for his aspirations to come into being. So, if the female is going to be used on television as a, quote, video babe, and her only function is to shake her booty and to show her breast and to lay down, then what does this leave for the nation? Since this woman who is laying naked in the bed and shaking her booty is going to be someone's mother. And since men form their views of women primarily based on their experience with their own mother, then until the black woman, instead of waiting for someone to come and uplift us, until we uplift ourselves and become self-respecting, we will not be respected, because a nation can rise no higher than its woman. Why? Women carry life. Women give birth to life. Women are the first teachers. And you will notice that there's no nation on this planet that is respected that has indecent women. And so, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad also says, where there are no decent women, there are no decent men. I just read before I came here in a magazine in the hotel talking about the increase in adultery. That one reason there is such a large increase in adultery is because there are so many women who are willing to engage in illicit affairs with married men. And so if women were to respect one another and to say to a man, no, I will not engage in a relationship with you because you are married and I respect that woman whether I know her or not. And if doors are shut, then there will be nowhere for him to go but home. And I close with this. We make fun of our grandmothers and their high neck blouses and their big high button shoes. But one thing that grandmother had, she had a husband who went out and worked that lower 40, and at night he came home to her. You have to give a man something to honor, and then he will rise to the occasion.
Well, I don't have very much to be thankful for. I think the only person that, or the only race that celebrates that holiday are the white people, because they're the only ones that have something to be thankful for. Everybody knows they kind of pushed us off, to the side, and if they could have had their way, there would be no Indians today. And so we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. We celebrate our families.
Good
evening. My name is Jamila Terrell, and my question is, what steps can women of color take to empower themselves in order to better race relations?
I'm sorry. Say that again more slowly.
What steps can women of color take to empower themselves in order to better race relations?
Oh, okay. You hear it? Yes. Okay.
Well, I think the first thing they need to do is to respect themselves and to educate themselves and to have a strong family unit, because it takes your family to teach you the respect that you need to have to get along with other races. I believe my family, my parents have done a wonderful job with me, because I want to say I'm colorblind, because I don't see, because I have brown skin too. And I don't see how I can be prejudiced against someone else. But what I recommend is education. You need to educate yourself, because if you're not educated, then you can't really go in and operate in mainstream society.
And also, I would repeat and reiterate that one thing that is missing among women of color is a bonding of the sisterhood. Because before we can talk about race relations, as Sister Yahola is talking about, we have to deal with family. Because without family, there's no community. And without community, there can be no nation. Because that's where power develops, is right in the community. Now, we know that in the so-called ghetto in America, when we walk through the streets, there is a certain depressed, gloomy atmosphere. And because of these feelings of inferiority that are bred into us as children, we have this idea that the solution to that problem is to escape and to leave the neighborhood or the community and to move among white people. It is not so much that we are so anxious to leave our own people and live among white people, but it is natural to want a nice home. But what escapes us is the idea that homes are nothing but brick and mortar and streets are nothing but concrete. And there's no reason in the world other than our own inferiority that is causing now the black community to look like it does and to feel the way it feels. There's no reason we can't wake up in the morning and have nice coffee shops. We shouldn't have to go miles away to go to a Starbucks as though that's the apex of coffee. You can open up a coffee shop and have muffins and baked goods. We can get a newspaper. We can have smooth sidewalks, but we have to do this ourselves. And this begins with the female who teaches the children, because our world is nothing more than what our thoughts create. And our community is a manifestation on the physical plane of how we see ourselves on the mental plane. And I invite you to get my book this evening, The Force and Power of Being. It addresses those issues. Thank you for that question, sister.
Very good. Let me add to that, in full association with both the remarks of both of our presenters. The 91 women from a century ago who were in my grandfather's book were women who functioned largely in their own communities. 100 years ago, people did not move around the way that we move around now, so these women had excelled in contributions to their communities. What had they done? They had opened training schools, daycare centers, settlement houses, and I know some of you may be too young to even remember what a settlement house is. It's a big place where people go to learn and to know how to get along with each other and to be protected. They were people who were the backbones of their churches, where they had programs that took care of families that were in distress, that provided for mothers who had new babies, who didn't know how to care for them. They represented the epitome of community building and contribution to community life. And that's what we have lost. As Minister Muhammad has pointed out, as people move from the community, those who were the leaders in this regard have moved, and there's no one there to transmit this process and to train the young women who are coming up with their children how to carry this out. The children in a single parent household are not new in our community. But we learned years ago that the concept of community parenting was something that was transmitted to us in our genes veritably. There's probably nobody over 40 in this audience whose parent didn't take in a stray child and help to raise that child. And there is a dialogue going on now among being funded by some of the foundations that care about this, about the black family, which dialogue has to do with the large numbers of unprotected children in our communities for whom there is no one speaking for their adoption and no one speaking for their foster care. And those activities have traditionally in our community been carried out by the women who are volunteering to improve and support the quality of life in their communities. So my response to that question is we have to get back in the mode of giving to the environment with which we identify. We have to be educated, we have to be able to cope in mainstream society, but we also have to recognize that there's no free lunch. And the price, as a friend of mine says, the price of living on this planet is contributing to its life. It is giving. And I think we got to give that gift. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Abdul Majid Muhammad. I'm the local representative of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. First, I'd like to say that it is an honor to be in this position, to be with these great, wonderful women who are leading. Those two women up there, number one. I want to thank Dr. Ray Winbush and the Race Relation Institute for bringing this about, because without that kind of idea and taking it a step further, this would have never happened. I'd like to thank them. And I have a question, a comment and a question for both of the panelists. My comment is that the similarities of both Minister Ava and Sister Rebecca of the Indian and the black situations, they are almost parallel, meaning that both of us have suffered under white supremacy. Now, after that is said, do anyone of the two think that there is a concerted effort to destroy the unity that is being set forth by the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, who is uniting blacks and Indians together, and then the call now for reparation for both of these people? I would like for those two panelists to please answer that and to see if there isn't not only the similarity of our circumstances that are really parallel, but also for the reparation, as I heard Sister Rebecca speaking of another form of reparations. But as we know, reparations this past April was presented to the UN by Dr. Aworo out of Chicago, Illinois. But the point is, now that the issue is out in the open, we're talking about race relations. Is there a concerted effort to destroy the unity that is being built by Minister Louis Farrakhan? I would like them to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I believe there is. The question that the gentleman raised earlier about peace on earth comes back to mind because there has been a history in this country of constant interference by the U.S. government in the effort to preserve the status quo, in any effort for people of color to unite. And this is why I mentioned earlier Minister Farrakhan standing at the center of controversy, and why every time a black leader male or female, who stands up and is willing to point out with clarity the problems of racism in this country, that person is shrouded in a cloud of controversy. Now, with the advancement in technology, Minister Farrakhan is constantly made the product of a series of selected sound bites and video clippings that make him appear to be on the lunatic fringe of society. The general American public is denied access to his lectures, to his book. I have, in fact, a copy of one of his books, A Torchlight for America. And in this book, Minister Farrakhan discusses the ills of America, one of which is the fact that there are two other peoples in this country, the Indian, or Native American, to be politically correct, as Sister Yehola says, but the Indian, who is the indigenous nation here. In other words, these are the people that God saw fit to give this land to, and who were living here when all of us came here. Then there is the black man, who the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, until the problem of the so-called Negro is resolved, there will never be peace. And so the United States government can say, well, it's the economy, it's jobs, it's finding whether or not there is life on Mars. These are the pressing problems of the day. You can look all around and you can avoid it, but until the problem of the Indian, who is the original owner of this land, and the problem of the so-called Negro, who was brought here from Africa and who built this country, until the descendants of these two people are given justice, there will be no peace. Not only here, but anywhere on the planet. And so, yes, there is a fear and there is a concern that the original owner of this land will come together with the original man on the planet, the black man, and that they will say, we want what is ours. However, what Caucasian people must recognize is that black people have no history of violence. Now, here we are out of slavery, walking around in and among the children of our slave masters. We're not seeking to do violence or ill will. See, that's part of the product of the imagination of a person with a damaged perception of reality, who misperceives themselves as God. No one is trying to do harm to you, but what we are saying is that we want some of this land to call our own. We don't want to live in the projects. We don't want food stamps. We don't want to stand in line for a big hunk of cheese to clog our arteries. We want reparations. If we would be paid, because we could never be fully compensated, but white people say, I never owned any slaves. This is the answer. That's in the past. But I raise this with you. There is something in the law called unjust enrichment. And this is where you may not have been the perpetrator of the offense, but you were enriched unjustly as the result of a wrong that was perpetrated on someone. This is why they have what is called criminal possession of stolen goods. I know that if someone walks up to me on the street with a 60-inch color Toshiba picture-in-picture television and offers it to me for $100, I know instinctively that something is wrong. And I ask you, if someone were to come and work in your home for an entire week and cook your food and change your bedding and wash your clothes and do your gardening and paint your house and clean your windows and sew your clothes, comb your hair, nurse your children, grow your food for free, would this be beneficial? Now, if they did this for a month, would it benefit you even more? If they did this for a year, would it benefit you even more? And I ask, if a whole people do this for a whole nother people for 400 years, does this not place you at a distinct advantage?
Sister Rebecca, would you like to take it back to the beginning of time? It's a big number.
All the way. It's going to be hard to follow that. I think there is an effort because right now with the Indian people, they have a law that is called the Indian Self-Determination Act. And what this law does is it is supposed to make the Indian tribes self-supporting. And what I think it is the government is trying to get out of their obligation to the Indian people, or monetary obligation to the Indian people. They owe us more money than is imaginable. And if they can get out of paying us one more penny, I believe that's what they're trying to do now. Every year the budget goes down that is allocated to the tribes, and the biggest tribes, it's called compacting. And in our area, we've had 3 tribes compact, and they take their money off the top of the money that's allocated. And what's left is for these smaller tribes, and it's basically down to 0. And they're trying to get rid of the Indian Health Service, for who I work with. And all the tribal leaders think this is such a wonderful plan that they have. And from what I've seen growing up through the years and living within the boundaries of the Cherokee Nation, they do not have the staff to be self-supporting, mainly because of their tribal councils and tribal leaders. It's all they see is dollar signs. So I think the government plays a big part in trying to keep the people of color from uniting.
Yeah, let me just add to that, that there are many reductions and changes in benefits which have occurred since 1994, actually, in public programs that nobody hears anything about because the press is not writing about them. But for speaking, Sister Rebecca just talked about some of the programs. Well, how many of you know that a program called Public and Indian Housing that was provided by the Department of Housing and Urban Development to provide affordable housing for Native Americans is no longer in existence? And there are a lot of programs that people didn't really ever hear about that just disappeared. And while we are distracted fighting particular battles like affirmative action, fighting battles to get African Americans in positions of importance so that we can at least know what's going on, taking tremendous amount of energy and untold periods of time for winning battles that ought to have been automatically victories. Right. These other activities are going on and nobody has a clue, and we look up and the benefits are gone and we don't know when that happened, and that's really an important event to be aware of. Sir.
Thank you. I too would like to thank the 2 women on stage for the presentations and the commitment to the struggle. As a participant in the Race Relations Institute and as a state legislator from Tennessee, Rebecca, I'm Representative Towns out of Memphis from the state of Tennessee. I would love to talk with you about what it is we can introduce in terms of legislation to protect the burial grounds and et cetera after this is over.
Could you say your name with the camera?
I'm Representative Joe Towns Jr. out of Memphis, Tennessee, participating in the Race Relations Institute for the entire week. and I was speaking specifically to Rebecca regarding something I heard. I'd love to meet with you after this and talk about some things we can do to introduce legislation to get the kind of protections that we need for the sacred grounds. Okay? Thank you. I also have a couple of announcements, and then I'm going to ask both of you all a question, if you don't mind. One is this, is that immediately following this meeting, all of you all are invited to attend a film. It's entitled Midnight Ramble, a documentary of the life of a pioneering black filmmaker, Oscar Micheaux. Thank you. It will be held at the Little Theater immediately after this, okay? Secondly, you are invited in the morning at the prayer session at 9:30 in Fisk Chapel. It's going to start at 9:30. Yours truly on stage, Dr. Yvonne Scroggs, will be our featured speaker. So please come and see her and hear her in the morning. You're more than welcome. And this is most important. Those of you that have participated during the week, I'm sure you've had your fill in terms of spiritual filling, knowledge, and etc., and rededication and commitment to the cause. But none of this takes place, nor can it be perpetuated without money. This is something, as a legislator, that I understand and I know. And what I'd like to do is encourage people to write checks at some point, as well as information to the Race Relation Institute here at Fisk University, and make sure the money goes specifically for the Race Relation Institute. Okay? The liberation has to be financed by all of us, okay? And we understand that. But those checks need to be made out to Fisk University Race Relation Institute. Let me emphatically stress that, so the work can continue. Other thing is this, is that there are corporate entities that have supported this, and I personally understand how it goes, and I think it would be also greatly appreciated if you also wrote letters to W.K. Kellogg's Foundation. I'll give you time to take your pens and pencils out if you'd like. I have an address for you. But it's to W.K. It's very important. This is just a letter telling the corporation how much you appreciate them sponsoring or helping to support race relations seminars so people can understand each other and solve this problem. Give you 10 seconds on the pencils. W.K. Kellogg Foundation, 1E Michigan Avenue, 1 East Michigan Avenue. W.K. Kellogg Foundation, 1 East Michigan Avenue. Battle Creek, Michigan, zip code 49017. Zip code 49017, and you're going to address it to the CEO, which is Dr. William Richardson. Dr. William Richardson, CEO of the Kellogg Foundation. If you are a full-fledged freedom fighter, you will write this letter. Okay. Now, my concerns or questions, I should say, or comments. One being, obviously, it's very apparent that the struggles of dark people around the world have been paralleled in the suffering and pain all around the world. Ours, I think, as African American people, was taken to the nth degree, such as the Native American in this country. What concerns me is that there are women organizations that I find African American women embracing themselves with that actually do nothing for the liberation and the struggle of their people. How do you respond to that, and what kind of clarification of purpose do we need to talk about in order to ensure that when we're involved in these organizations that really net benefit are for white women, and it does not address and deal with any kind of workable antidotes for African American women and minority women? Second question is, from a legal perspective, the Holocaust, when you talk about the Holocaust and what happened, what do you think the probability of it is, and the sensibility of it is for the kinds of atrocities that have happened to African American people and other people in this country, where you have names where you have addresses and you can trace people down, the same kind of war crimes that were committed on us as well. Yet there has been no prosecution for those kinds of crimes. I'd like some comments on that from either one of you all.
As to black women aligning ourselves sometimes with women's organizations that are actually predominantly designed to further the interests of Caucasian women, it is a concern of mine, but it's a very complex issue because, again, oftentimes one's perception of where one should be evolves out of their life experience. And unfortunately, because as black women, we suffer from the dual effects of racism and sexism, sometimes the residual effects of being victimized by both results in wanting to pretend that one does not exist in order to focus on the other. I myself, for example, in all honesty, suffered from the extreme other end of the spectrum in that I grew up in a household where my father pushed us. It was all girls, 3 daughters, and I never really experienced sexism until I got out into the world. And so I was very deeply focused on racism, and I did not know how deeply rooted sexism is. On the other hand, you have black women have grown up and never really experienced racism in its most horrific forms. Oftentimes, the black woman is given avenues into mainstream America, particularly mainstream corporate America, because she is not perceived as the threat that the black male is seen as, and so she may not, on a day-to-day basis, experience the manifestations of racism in the same way. Now, for example, when my husband and I travel together, he is a tall, dark, muscular black man, and it is being with him that has really awakened me on the physical plane to what black men encounter on a daily basis, in that whenever we walk into a bank or a store or we go into the first class section of an airplane, there's always this resistance to him. There's also a desire not to address him, but to address me. But of course, he does not tolerate that, and I don't fall for that. Because he's also an educated black man, but more than that, he's an independent black man. All right. But what I'm saying is this, is that the dual effects of these two very damaging things have produced a very confused people. But I would take this opportunity to warn black women to be very careful when you ally yourselves with other women, because what the Caucasian female experiences as a manifestation of sexism is a whole nother reality. Right. And being female may cause a suffering, but you know, people change their gender. But the first thing people see when they see us coming is our color. See, people don't say, oh, there goes a woman black. They say, there goes a black woman, or there goes a nigger woman. And why did you hang her and cut her belly open when she was pregnant with an 8-month-old child in her womb? Because she's a nigger woman, not because she's a woman. But it's something that has to be addressed. I don't think we can do it here tonight, but I appreciate you bringing that issue up. Yes.
Rebecca, you want to take the one about the Holocaust perpetrators?
Could you repeat that question, please?
In short, basically what it states is that, such as in the Holocaust, there were people that committed war crimes against Jewish people, yet you find that in latter days, or recent days, they're being sought and prosecuted. The same thing, I contend, happened with people of Native American ancestry as well as black. Should we seek and prosecute those people criminally? Prosecute those people where we have information for the wrong that we know that was done and documented.
Well, I think we should, but in the case of Indian people that have committed crimes against us is the government. So if we wanted to prosecute someone, it would have to be all of the government and white people.
While I understand that, the fact of it is that the wars that have been fought in these countries have been fought in the name of the government, but on the end of that, there has been a man with a name that has gone overboard in his pursuit.
I can name one individual now, which is Andrew Jackson.
Absolutely right.
He sits over here at Old Hickory, Tennessee, just down the road, and people have asked me if I've ever been over.
Did you plant evidence at the crime scene to the Fifth Amendment? Now, the last time I read the Fifth Amendment, its sole purpose is to protect you against self-incrimination. When you say I take the Fifth, what you are saying is I am not going to answer that question because to answer it may incriminate me. Well, there are only two answers to that question, yes or no. He took the Fifth, and yet there's still an aura in the air of whether or not this man is guilty. But here is a police officer who, when asked, did you plant evidence at the scene, took the Fifth. Now, he writes a book, and the book is on the New York Times bestseller list. He is sent around on the talk show circuit, and he is rehabilitated by white America. And again, this is why I say there is an abyss, and why I agree with Minister Farrakhan that the perceptions are irreconcilable. And so the only solution is that both of us have to submit and see what the will of God is. White people have a tendency, because of seeing themselves as the apex of intelligence, when we come to a table, well, if I don't agree with you, then the solution is then you just totally submit to my will. We have to learn how to reach some middle ground where all of the people on the earth, and this is what the brother brought up before, that there is this warlike, hostile, territorial attitude that says what I like has to dominate. But to hold Mark Furman up in our face and make him a millionaire as what appears to be a reward for his treatment of our people, I think is just despicable, and I think he should be prosecuted.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, we're going to have to cut the questions at the end of the person who's standing in line, and we have 10 minutes. And so really make your question brief, and we'll make the answers brief.
I'll try to make it brief. My name is Brian Dennis. I'm from Philadelphia, and it's a two-part question. I've worked in the radio business since 1984, and I don't know if a lot of people are aware that I believe in 1994 or 95, there was a rule that allowed companies to purchase as many radio stations as they can afford. What most people don't know, that there are 3 or 4 companies that own all the black radio stations in America. I'm not familiar with what's happening here in Tennessee, but the question is that it's the same thing. The question is that the telecommunications bill, which this secondary law slid under with, hasn't even been acted on. And these guys have acted on this other issue of controlling certain segments of music. Now, we all, not saying we all, some of us don't like rap music, some of us like it. The music that's being produced by some of the rap artists is offensive. They take the curse words, switch them around, use double entendres. How do we legally change the ownership of a whole category of music?
I don't know who, and you can take a cut at it.
Is it even possible to do at this stage? Because they own all the R&B stations, all the young adult black stations. Separate companies own all the rock and roll. Separate companies own all the country. And again, the communication or the information about what's going on in Black America is going to be transmitted through radio.
Can I just take a cut at that? I've been involved in Washington in this issue, and you're right, but it was not true that it slipped under. There were people, and that's one of the problems of the inside the Beltway versus the outside the Beltway. There were people in Washington, and still are, very, very actively involved in trying to reverse that piece of public policy. But one of the things that I think we are victimized by almost incidentally or as an unanticipated consequence is that capitalism still is the primary economic policy in this country. And whether it is African Americans who own all the radio stations or whites who own all the radio stations, the concept of private ownership tends to prevail almost without exception in the United States. And that is one of the concerns about the formulation of that piece of public policy, that it is in fact a capitalist piece of public policy. And no, to answer your question, there's virtually nothing that can be done about the ownership or the monopoly. There is something that can be and should be done about the fact that the laws have been rewritten in such a way that African Americans will not be able to acquire radio stations as was the case in the past. This is one of the negative consequences of the anti-affirmative action move. That's what it is. Sorry. Next.
Thank you. My name is Jean Vaughn. I would like to say I'm going to take my hat off to the two young ladies there, and to also the host, and also to the person that put this marvelous conference together. So many of my questions have been answered, but I just want to say this, that it takes a village to raise a child. So when we get back to that concept in our little small community, I'm from a small community, a family of 14 children. And I would like to say my mother was a single parent. And we all turned out well. And I was a single parent, and all my kids are college graduates. And I have a daughter who is in Atlanta who's an attorney, who, by the way, passed her bar on the first time. And I'm sure the reason why the Bonet family came to Atlanta because they knew you were there, and that you could help them. But on a more serious note, I would like to say that, the term dysfunctional family, and you addressed that exquisitely about, there have always been single parent, and your answers, the answer that you gave answered that for me, and I would use that in some things that I would share in my community. The other thing I want to ask you is that I can see that there's a decline, and there is always an evil force going on. I would like to ask either one of you, do you think that drugs, I think that drugs could be eliminated if they want to be. I think that drug is brought in by the purpose that has a greed, and also there's a deterrent. There was a way to genocide the black male. So I have 12 brothers, black male, and 2 sisters, so I'm just thinking in terms, and I see so many young people falling for that thing, the quick dollar. But do you think that, would you address that issue about the drug that's really affecting our neighborhoods so rampantly and so devastating in many families? I see parents, thank God that, I have not had to face that with my children, but it is my brothers, I have brothers and nephews that, are in that arena, and it's so devastating.
Let us try to answer quickly.
Just briefly, the drug problem is such an in-your-face, obvious matter that could be resolved if it were, in fact, coming from some external force, as the government claims. But there is so much money that is being made in drugs. Secondly, not only do drugs keep us from rising up and obtaining our legitimate aspirations, the black community is infiltrated with different drugs at different times, at different points in our history, if we study it. And these drugs are specifically designed to have an impact to overcome a particular state of mind. But some of our scientists among us, such as Dr. Richard King and other of our scientists who have studied melanin and found that, for instance, crack cocaine, and we know that crack is synthetic. Crack binds with the melanin molecule. In other words, it is instantly addictive for black people. And so it did not flood our community by accident. Heroin did not come in the 60s in the middle of the black liberation movement by accident. But I want to even go a step further. Not only are we drugged, this whole country is on drugs. Do you know how many millions of people are on Prozac and Valium and can't get through the morning without a Bloody Mary? And the value in the whole populace being on one sort of drug or another is that it makes us oblivious to the misery of our condition.
Thank you. Thank you. While you're getting your question organized, because we're getting to the end of the program, just let me preempt this time to thank this audience for your participation, for your enthusiasm, and for your sharing. Thank you very much. Quickly, we got our 3 minutes.
This is related to what we said earlier about the U.S. government or the whites trying to keep colored people separated. And I wanted to say that as long as we won't put our differences together and try to be united in order to fight that, they're always going to keep us separated, because as long as I'm from Africa, as long as African people would think, well, we're different from them because they were taken by sheep, or as long as African American here would think, well, African, they live in the jungle, or as long as, Indians won't put their differences together and say, okay, we're all colored and we should be together, we're always going to be oppressed.
Okay. We agree with that. You say it's your next question, and then I'll ask the panelists.
Hi, my name is Sister Jamie Muhammad. My beloved sister Nancy had a question beforehand. Her question was in reference to Ebonics, and do you think that that's another device to separate us? And is that a situation to keep us unintelligent, where we always stress education, and that's another way to keep us uneducated? And my question was in reference to evolution. I've ran across some brothers and sisters who strongly believe in evolution. So can you please explain that to me? Because we're talking about church and getting our community back to letting God, seeing things through God's eyes, which you were speaking of earlier. But how do you tell that to somebody who believes in evolution?
Well, just very quickly, evolution can't do anything more than describe the creative process. Evolution is a process, so it still has to have a point of origin. Now, this building that we're in now, could you just walk in this building and say it was just here, so I'm going to take it and make it mine? If we look at the organization of life on this planet, and look at this solar system, that didn't just come out of an explosion. That came from an intelligent mind. So that's my answer on to the evolutionists. And Ebonics, we have to, if we speak English, we should speak it properly. That's all. We don't have to worry about a culture, because we're going to lapse into Ebonics at home anyway. So there's no danger of being lost. We all do it. We all be doing it. And we at home. Keep it at home in the house.
Let me just add to that by saying the purpose of language is to communicate. And so you have to ask the fundamental question, with whom do you need to communicate in order to survive and how? And so you will use, and if you don't learn to use different kinds of tools to communicate in different settings, you will not survive. And that's the answer with regard to Ebonics. We're here to survive. And that should be our message. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a marvelous experience, and I want you to join me in thanking this panel, Minister Eva Mohammed and our sister Rebecca Mouse-Delcola for such a wonderful presentation. A very short joke, because we should leave here laughing. Bill Cosby talks about the young man who's raised by his parents, but his father takes him out to the football field and teaches him how to throw the football, and he takes him to football games so that the young man ends up in college, and he is on the football team. He's a quarterback, and he throws the touchdown pass, and the television camera points to him, and the father is in the stand just yelling, and the guy looks in the television camera and says, "Hiya, Mom." That's what powerful women are about.
Wonderful, Let me give you my card. I'm Marilyn Roberts. Hey, nice to meet you. Hi, I was trying to get your...